Hi, my name is Pat Horn. I'm the Assistant Program Manager here at the Lakeshore Museum Center. And about a month ago, we had a snowy owl that was sitting on top of our archives building. And today, our maintenance guys were up on the roof and they discovered that it had left behind a little present for us. So it left behind an owl pellet, and what we're going to do today is dissect it live for you so you get a chance to see what our owl was eating and what we can learn about the animals here in downtown Muskegon. Now, we do this program with school kids a lot of times, and so we know quite a bit of information about these owl pellets, but one thing that I'm going to do today is wear gloves. Usually we don't wear gloves, but the pellets we buy are heat sterilized. This one, since it's from a wild owl, we'll put some gloves on just for safety's sake. Now, just looking at our pellet here on the outside of it, you can see the fur on it is pretty dark gray. You can see quite a few bones sticking out. I see lots of really small bones sticking out as well. It's a pretty good sized pellet, so our owl, I'm going to guess, ate more than one animal, but we'll start to see what it is. I'm going to start dissecting it by pulling it apart, and the first thing I got here is a feather. Now, a lot of times these pellets, when they cough them up, they're pretty wet, and so the owl's feathers can get into the pellet. But if we start to see a lot more feathers in here, we know our owl might have actually eaten a bird, which does happen, but it's a little rarer than rodents. So here's just a small little bone chip, and hopefully you can see that on the table. We've got a small little bone right here, and I do have with me a skewer stick that'll help me clean out some of this fur to identify it a little bit better. That looks partially like a shoulder blade or a hip. This is a pretty long and skinny bone here. And I'm not entirely sure what that is from right now. One of the things that we always tell students when they're dissecting pellets is that you want to find the skull, because that gives you a lot of clues as to what the animal is. And this bone here is another pretty long, skinny one, and I can't quite tell if it's hollow or not. If the bones are hollow, that is a good indicator that is from a bird. In order to help them fly, they have hollow bones, so they're a bit lighter weight. And this one right here, yep, this is definitely kind of stuck together. Looks like we have a little bit of tendon actually that didn't get quite digested. It's kind of gross, but kind of cool too. And so yeah, I don't know if you can see that there, but you can see some of this fur right in this area here. So this is a hollow bone. So this is from a kind of a bird. And I'll see what else I can pull out of here. If I happen to find the skull, it'll give me a little bit of an idea what kind of bird our owl might have eaten. However, birds are a lot of times really large, and the owl doesn't necessarily digest it and cough it up in one whole pellet. So that owl might have deposited another pellet somewhere else with the rest of this meal. That's looking a lot like a partial rib bone. There's another potential one. Usually you see rodent bones. That's the main animal that owls eat. You can see right here, that's a great example that you can see that that is hollow. There's a nice cavity in there. So I've got some decent sized chunks, but nothing that looks like our skull at all, or even part of our skull. This is pretty exciting. I've only seen a couple of birds in all my time of doing dissection here, so they're pretty rare. There's just a lot of really, really little bones in here as well that they could help you piece it back together, but as far as identification go, they don't give you too much information. Let's see if I can find a bigger piece. Oh. There's another thin, small little bone, probably part of a pelvis or the hip. There's another piece. I'll try and do my best to clean it off. Now, one thing you might be thinking if you've ever find one of these at home is just wash the bones off. However, this fur that's covering it, or the feathers, will start to decay really quickly if you get it wet, and so that'll give off a pretty nasty smell as well. So you really want to avoid doing that. Your best bet is just to clean it off using the skewer and just kind of picking off pieces to it. And then as it dries out some more, you can scrape it off a bit more. So here we've got another piece to match the other one, and just like in our other bone here, we've got that little bit of tendon that's still attached, and it's not really. Let me separate these apart. I believe they are part of the wings for the bird, but I'm not entirely sure. Nice little thin rib-like bone. There's another one. So I've got one more larger clump here. Maybe I'll find a skull. Now, one thing that some people think about when they think about owl pellets is that it's actually either their poop, which it's definitely not that, or it's owl vomit, which is not quite the same thing. It's a regurgitation process. So it's more like your cat's hairball, really. So when they eat these animals, just about everything is digested. Their stomachs are really powerful. They'll take, the muscles and tissues and all that and digest that for nutrition, but the fur or the feathers and the bones just can't be digested, and so it basically gets compacted like a trash compactor in the owl's stomach, and then the next time before the owl goes out hunting, it'll regurgitate that pellet. So it's not quite vomiting it, but kind of a similar process. And then when you find those, or when scientists find them, they can take them apart just like I'm doing, and it can teach you a lot about your owl's habitat. So for example, we didn't find a rodent in here, we had a bird, so we know our owl was hunting some birds, which are usually rare finds. Because most birds are sleeping during the day, owls don't usually run into them because they're mostly active at night. There is some crossover though, and so occasionally you do have owls eating smaller birds, usually songbirds. So here looks like another part of our hip or our pelvis. You can see I've got quite a few feathers there. More rib bones. So it doesn't look like we're going to have a skull here today, so somewhere out there is another pellet that has a bird skull in it. One way to identify a bird skull from other animal skulls is that they won't have any teeth. So birds don't have teeth, so when you find those skulls, you'll notice that they just have the beak. This here looks possibly like a part of a vertebrae. It's a pretty large vertebrae, so I would guess something maybe sparrow size or so. Hard to say for sure though. Let me see, I'm going to double check just to make sure there's no other large bones left. This feels like another piece of vertebrae. So that is, there's, just when you think you know the owl pellet, you never are. There's always more to find. I've got another vertebrae in this clump of fur here too, so You know, one of the things that I always like to do, especially when we're talking with the kids, is make sure you go through it again, feel it. You can usually feel the lumps of the bone in there, because sometimes really cool and important pieces for identification can be buried in the fur or the feathers. Yep, this is another vertebrae. If I put my vertebrae together, you can kind of see our spine forming up. Oh, and another one. Yeah, it's really disappointing that there's not a skull in here, because those are really a key indicator bone. But just by the hollow feather or the hollow bones, lots of feathers in our pellet here, I can for sure tell you it is a bird. There's another vertebrae. And these pieces here, I don't know if I can clean them up a little bit better, but well, alright, I think that's going to be all of our exciting finds. I'll probably pick through this a little bit more, but thank you very much for joining us today. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and we'll probably be coming to you live again sometime from the future.